In the last years, we have seen disappear legendary names like Flybe, and we have assisted to last-minute rescues that have saved others. But the storm has not passed. In 2027, there is a dozen of airlines that could say goodbye forever. Some have been for years at the edge of bankruptcy, others have seen how their market evaporated, and a few are at a single step from the precipice. Today, we are going to reveal those 12 names. We present them in decreasing order from those that still have a thread of hope to the one that has its days numbered. Let us begin. Position 12, Jetstar Japan. We begin our countdown in Japan, a country where domestic aviation is fiercely competitive. Jetstar Japan is the Japanese subsidiary of the Australian Qantas, and during years it has been one of the most solid low cost of the market, but the winds have changed. The recovery of tourism in Japan has been slower than expected, and the competition has intensified with the arrival of new low-cost airlines like Peach Aviation and Spring Airlines Japan. Jetstar Japan has a fleet of 32 Airbus A320 planes, all of them with a low average age and a correct maintenance, but the problem is not technical, it is financial. The airline has 3 consecutive years declaring losses, and its Australian parent is tired of injecting money. In 2026, the losses have deepened by the weakness of the yen, which makes costs more expensive in the local market. Additionally, Jetstar Japan has not achieved to differentiate itself enough from its competitors. It offers the same as the others, but without the brand recognition of the locals. The analysts point out that Qantas could be looking for a buyer for its Japanese subsidiary, or simply close it if it does not find an investor. For now, Jetstar Japan continues flying, but its days are numbered. If there is no quick recovery of tourism and an improvement of its accounts, it could disappear in 2027. That is why it is in position 12, the one that has more options to survive of all the list. Position 11, Air Malta. Air Malta is one of those small airlines with a long and complicated history. Founded in 1973, it has been during decades the gateway to the island for millions of tourists. But its size, which should be an advantage, has become its principal weakness. With a fleet of barely 8 Airbus A320 planes, Air Malta does not have the necessary scale to compete with the big low cost that operate in the Mediterranean. The Maltese airline has been years in losses. The successive governments have had to rescue it one and another time, injecting millions of euros to avoid its collapse. The European Union, tired of these rescues, has put an ultimatum. Either Air Malta restructures truly and becomes profitable, or there will be no more public aids. In 2026, Air Malta presented a restructuring plan that includes the reduction of fleet, the cut of routes, and the search for a private partner. But the plan is fragile and depends on an investor appearing. Until now, the negotiations with possible buyers have not come to fruition. Air Malta continues flying, but its situation is so precarious that any small setback could be fatal. If it does not find a partner in the next months, its disappearance in 2027 is almost certain. Position 10, SAS Scandinavian Airlines. SAS is a giant of Northern Europe, but a giant with feet of clay. The flag airline of Sweden, Denmark, and Norway has been years in a desperate struggle to be profitable, and the results do not accompany. Its principal problem are the labor costs. The collective agreements in Scandinavia are of the most generous in the world. High salaries, reduced shifts, long vacations, and very strong union protections. That is very good for the workers, but for an airline that competes with low costs like Norwegian and Ryanair, it is a slab impossible to lift. In 2022, SAS took refuge in Chapter 11 of the American bankruptcy law to protect itself from its creditors while it restructured. It exited the process in 2024 with a lighter structure, but the deep problems continue without being resolved. The labor costs continue being extremely high, and the competition does not give a truce. Additionally, the Scandinavian governments, which are shareholders, are tired of putting money and want to sell their stakes. In 2026, SAS continues declaring losses. It has tried to find an industrial partner, with conversations with Lufthansa and Air France KLM, but the negotiations stretch and do not end in concretizing. If SAS does not achieve to close an alliance or a sale in the next months, its future is very uncertain. That is why it is in position 10 of our list. Position 9, TAP Air Portugal. TAP Air Portugal is another of those airlines that have been years on the tightrope. The Portuguese flag airline has a strategic position at the gateway to Europe, with connections to Brazil and Africa that are its principal asset. But that is not enough to be profitable. The problems of TAP are several. On one hand, the competition in the Iberian Peninsula is fierce, with Iberia, Ryanair, and other low-cost fighting for the same cake. On the other hand, the labor costs, although not as high as in Scandinavia, continue being a burden. And the debt accumulated during the pandemic is enormous, exceeding the 1,000 million euros. The Portuguese government has tried to privatize TAP in several occasions, but the investors do not end in launching themselves. In 2023, the German group Lufthansa showed interest, but the conditions imposed by the Portuguese government, maintain the headquarters in Lisbon, protect the jobs, cooled the operation. In 2025, the conversations were resumed, but without concrete advances. In 2026, TAP continues declaring losses. The cuts of routes and the reduction of fleet have not been enough. The airline needs a deep restructuring, but the unions resist and the government does not dare to take unpopular measures. TAP is a chronic patient, and its disappearance in 2027 is a real possibility if an investor does not arrive. Position 8, Fiji Airways. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, at thousands of kilometers from any continent, there is a small paradise called Fiji. Its white sand beaches, its turquoise waters, and its luxury resorts attract travelers from all over the world. And the one in charge of bringing those travelers is Fiji Airways, the flag airline of this insular country. But depending on tourism has a price, and in 2026, Fiji Airways is paying it expensive. The history of Fiji Airways is the history of a relative success. Founded in 1951, it has achieved to connect these lost islands with destinations like Australia, New Zealand, United States, and some points of Asia. Its fleet, although small, is modern, with Airbus A330 and Boeing 737 planes that offer a service very appreciated by the travelers. But its size is also its principal weakness. When the pandemic closed borders in 2020, Fiji Airways was at the edge of collapse. Tourism, which represents a third of the GDP of Fiji, paralyzed completely. The airline stopped receiving income practically entirely and had to resort to aids from the government and to international loans to survive. It survived, yes, but it remained very weakened. In 2026, the recovery has not been as quick as they expected. World tourism has suffered from inflation, geopolitical tensions, and the changes in travel habits. Additionally, the competition in the Pacific is every time greater. Airlines like Qantas, Air New Zealand, American Airlines, and United have increased their flights to the islands, offering direct connections from their hubs that compete directly with the routes of Fiji Airways. The airline needs to diversify to find new routes and new markets that do not depend so much on vacation tourism. It has tried to open flights to destinations like Tokyo, Singapore, or Vancouver, but it is not easy to compete with the big Asians. Also, it needs to renew its fleet, but the new planes cost tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, and Fiji Airways does not have that money. The government of Fiji, which is the principal shareholder, cannot continue injecting funds without limit. The losses accumulate, and the airline seeks desperately a solution. If it does not find it, it could disappear in 2027. Position 7, Garuda Indonesia. We close this first chapter with one of the largest airlines of Southeast Asia, but also one of the most indebted. Garuda Indonesia is the flag airline of Indonesia, an archipelagic country of more than 17,000 islands where the plane is often the only way to move. With a demand so big, Garuda should be the queen of the market. But the reality is very different. Garuda has been years suffocated by a multi-millionaire debt. The problems come from far: bad management, corruption, uncontrolled expansion, and an oversized fleet. In 2021, the airline entered into bankruptcy proceedings. It tried to restructure its debt, negotiate with the lessors of planes, and reduce its fleet, but the process has been slow and complicated. In 2026, Garuda continues declaring losses. The competition from the low cost like Lion Air is fierce, and Garuda cannot compete in prices. Its costs are higher, its fleet is older, and its service, although better, is not enough to attract the passengers that seek cheap tickets. The Indonesian government has had to inject money in several occasions, but it can no longer more. The lessors of planes have begun to recover apparatuses before the lack of payments. The fleet of Garuda is reduced month by month, and with it, its capacity to generate income. The Indonesian government studies a forced merger with other local airlines to avoid the total collapse, but the negotiations are complex and the interests opposed. Garuda Indonesia is at the edge of the abyss. If there is no miracle, its disappearance in 2027 is almost certain. Position 6, South African Airways. South African Airways is the perfect example of how not to manage an airline company. Founded in 1934, it was during decades the flag airline of South Africa, a national pride that connected the country with Europe, Asia, and America. But the problem started long before the pandemic. Bad management, corruption, politically motivated but economically unfeasible routes, and in every time more fierce competition by part of private airlines like FlySafair and British Airways Comair were undermining its financial health. In 2020, when COVID paralyzed the world, South African Airways entered into bankruptcy proceedings. It seemed the end. But the South African government, in a desperate attempt to save the thousands of jobs and the national pride, injected thousands of millions of rands to rescue it. The problem is that the rescue did not come accompanied by a deep restructuring. The costs continued being extremely high, the fleet, composed of Airbus planes, continued aging, and the passengers, who had discovered other options, did not return in the expected quantity. In 2026, South African Airways is again at the edge of the precipice. The profitable routes like Johannesburg-London have been taken over by foreign airlines like Emirates, Qatar Airways, and British Airways. In the domestic market, FlySafair eats the toast from it with lower prices and an efficiency that the state airline cannot equal. The accumulated debt exceeds $1,000 million, and the South African government, with economic problems of its own, no longer can continue injecting money. The workers have been months without getting paid, the suppliers demand payments in advance, and the fleet is reduced for lack of maintenance. The government has tried to seek a private partner, but the negotiations with possible investors have broken one and another time. South African Airways is a terminal patient in an ICU without electricity. If there is no last-minute miracle, its disappearance in 2027 is inevitable. That is why it is in position 6. Position 5, Aerolíneas Argentinas. To speak of Aerolíneas Argentinas is to speak of a classic in the lists of airlines in crisis. The Argentine flag airline has been decades giving losses, and the successive governments, whether Peronists or Macrists, have tried to privatize it, sell it, close it, or rescue it without success. The problem is structural and seems to have no solution. Aerolíneas Argentinas has an oversized staff with extremely high labor costs that are fruit of decades of collective agreements favorable to the unions. It has an inefficient fleet with old planes that consume more fuel than the modern ones. And it has a network of routes that includes little profitable destinations like flights to Patagonian provinces that are maintained for political reasons, not economic. Every time that a government tries to cut routes or reduce personnel, the unions paralyze the country with strikes and the government retreats. In 2026, the situation is more serious than ever. Argentina crosses a deep economic crisis with an inflation that exceeds 100% annual, a constant devaluation of its currency and international reserves under minimums. The government has no money to continue subsidizing the airline, which needs monthly transfers of tens of millions of dollars to survive. The attempts to reduce costs clash with the union opposition, and the passengers, fed up with the delays and the cancellations, opt for foreign airlines like LATAM, Copa, or American Airlines to fly abroad, and for low cost like Flybondi or JetSmart to fly inside the country. Aerolíneas Argentinas is technically in bankruptcy, and only survives thanks to state aids that are every time more difficult to justify. The International Monetary Fund, which monitors the Argentine accounts, has demanded the government to stop subsidizing loss-making companies. If that occurs, Aerolíneas Argentinas will not last even 6 months. That is why it is in position 5. Position 4, Pakistan International Airlines. Pakistan International Airlines, known by its acronym PIA, is another of those airlines that seem to carry a curse on top. Founded in 1946, 1 year before the independence of Pakistan, it arrived to be one of the most prestigious airlines of Asia, but the decades of bad management, corruption, and political interferences have taken it to where it is today, forbidden in Europe and United States with an astronomical debt and a reputation made into pieces. The mortal blow arrived in 2020. An investigation revealed that almost a third of the commercial pilots of Pakistan had false licenses. They had not passed the exams, they did not have the necessary formation, and nevertheless they were flying with passengers on board. The scandal was of such magnitude that the European Union forbade P1A to fly in its airspace. United States did the same. From the night to the morning, the airline lost the most profitable routes, those that connected Pakistan with London, Birmingham, Paris, and New York. Since then, PIA only operates domestic flights and to a few destinations in Asia, like Dubai, Jeddah, and Kuala Lumpur. But even in those routes, the problems accumulate. The debt exceeds $2,000 million. The workers have been months without getting paid. The strikes are constant and the planes stay on ground for lack of spare parts. The Pakistani government has tried to privatize the airline in several occasions, but no investor wants to buy a company with such a damaged reputation and an obsolete fleet. In 2026, PIA is a walking corpse. The lessors of planes have begun to recover the apparatuses before the lack of payments. The fleet is reduced month by month, and with it, the income. The government studies the liquidation but fears the political and social consequences. Meanwhile, the passengers avoid flying with them out of fear and insecurity. Pakistan International Airlines has its days numbered. Its disappearance in 2027 is almost certain. That is why it is in position 4. Position 3, Sri Lankan Airlines. Sri Lanka is a country with a millenary history, a fascinating culture, and an exuberant nature, but also it is a country that has lived one of the most serious economic crises of its history. In 2022, the inflation triggered, the international reserves exhausted, there was a lack of foods, fuel, and medicines. The government collapsed, the president fled, and the country was at the edge of the abyss. In that context, Sri Lankan Airlines, the flag airline, could not exit well-placed. Sri Lankan Airlines was founded in 1979. During years, it had a strategic alliance with Emirates, which managed the airline and helped it grow. But the alliance ended in 2008, and since then, the airline has gone downhill. The problems of management, the corruption, and the lack of investment have been sinking it. The economic crisis of Sri Lanka was a mortal blow. The debt of Sri Lankan Airlines, which already was high, triggered. The government, which is the principal shareholder, has no money to rescue the airline. The attempts to privatize it have failed one and another time. In 2024, it was tried to sell it, but no investor presented a convincing offer. In 2025, it was tried again with the same result. In 2026, Sri Lankan Airlines is in a critical situation. The fleet has been reduced to a dozen planes, all of them leased and with contracts that expire. The routes have been canceled one after another. It no longer flies to Europe except to London, and that route is in doubt. The flights to India, which were its principal market, have been cut. The passengers flee to other airlines. Emirates, Qatar, Etihad, Air India all offer better connections and better service. The workers have been months with delays in the payments. The suppliers demand payments in cash. The planes have maintenance problems. Sri Lankan Airlines is a terminal patient in a broken country. If a miraculous investor does not appear, if there is no last-minute rescue, the airline will disappear in 2027. That is why it is in position 3. Position 2, Malaysia Airlines. There are airlines that have suffered accidents, that have passed through crises, that have had to restructure, but few have lived what Malaysia Airlines. In 2014, the Malaysian Airlines suffered two of the greatest tragedies of the history of aviation. The 8th of March, the Flight 370 disappeared from the radar with 239 people on board. To this day, it is not known what happened. The remains never appeared, the theories multiply, the mystery continues without being resolved. 4 months later, the 17th of July, the Flight 17 was shot down by a missile over Ukraine, killing the 298 people that traveled on board. Those two blows, united to a deficient management and to the fierce competition in Southeast Asia, took Malaysia Airlines to the edge of bankruptcy. The passengers stopped flying with it, the routes emptied, the losses accumulated. The Malaysian government, owner of the airline, had to nationalize it again and inject money to save it. In the following years, Malaysia Airlines tried to restructure. It reduced fleet, canceled routes, fired personnel, changed image, but the weight of the accidents continues being very heavy. Every time that someone looks for a flight to Malaysia, remembers what happened. Every time that a passenger goes up to a plane of Malaysia Airlines, thinks of the 370. In 2026, the airline continues declaring losses. The competition in Southeast Asia is fierce. Singapore Airlines, Thai Airways, Vietnam Airlines, the low-cost like AirAsia all fight for the same cake. Malaysia Airlines is one more, and it is not the best. Its fleet is old, its service is improvable, its image is damaged. The airline seeks investors. There have been conversations with Japan Airlines, with Qatar Airways, with local groups, but the conditions imposed by the possible buyers include massive dismissals and cuts of routes that result politically unacceptable. The Malaysian government cannot continue putting infinite money. If Malaysia Airlines does not find a strong industrial partner that helps it re-emerge, its end is near. That is why it is in position 2. Position 1, Thai Airways. And we arrive at number 1. The airline with more probabilities of disappearing in 2027 is Thai Airways. It can seem surprising because Thai is an airline with name, with history, with a reputation of good service. But the numbers do not lie, and those of Thai are terrifying. Thai Airways has been years in an interminable restructuring. In 2020, the airline took refuge in the Thai bankruptcy law, a process similar to the American Chapter 11. Since then, it has been negotiating with its creditors, returning planes, canceling routes, and reducing personnel. But the process has lengthened much more than planned, and the results do not arrive. The debt of Thai Airways exceeds 3,000 million euros. Yes, you have read well, 3,000 million. It is one of the largest debts of the history of aviation. The interests of that debt eat any benefit that the airline could generate, and the benefits, for the moment, do not appear. Thailand is one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world. Millions of travelers arrive every year to its beaches, its temples, and its cities. And Thai Airways should be the great beneficiary of that tourist flow. But it is not. The competition of the airlines of the Gulf and of the Asian low cost is fierce. Emirates, Qatar Airways, Etihad, Singapore Airlines all offer better connections and better prices. The low-cost like AirAsia dominate the domestic and regional market with rates that Thai cannot equal. The fleet of Thai is old and is badly maintained. The planes have a high average age and the delays and cancellations are frequent. The service, which was its pride, has decayed. The passengers complain of the food, of the entertainment, of the attention. The reputation of Thai has been crumbling. The Thai government, which is the principal shareholder, has tried to seek a private partner, but the negotiations with possible investors have failed one and another time. The restructuring plan approved by the courts included the sale of non-strategic assets like buildings and stakes in companies, but the income generated is insufficient. The recovery of tourism in Thailand does not reach the predicted figures and the losses become chronic. Thai Airways has exhausted all its options. It has cut everything cuttable, it has sold everything sellable, it has negotiated with all the creditors, and even so continues losing money. If there is no massive rescue by part of the Thai government, which already has said that it cannot continue injecting funds, Thai Airways will disappear in 2027. It is the airline with more ballots, the one that has its days more numbered. That is why it is the number 1 of our list. Until here, the 12 airlines that have more probabilities of disappearing in 2027, from those that still could be saved to those that are at the edge of the abyss. Some have been decades in crisis, others have been victims of accidents or of the competition. All share the same fragility. Aviation is an implacable business, and what today is a flag airline, tomorrow can be a memory.